So amid record low polling, and we're talking record low, a new projection shows President Trump's net approval rating is negative in 47 out of 50 states. That is according to The Economist and YouGov. Trump's net approval is minus 26. Going state by state, the data shows widespread dissatisfaction with Trump, even in places that voted for him in 2024. Ahead of the midterms, Trump has a negative net approval rating in all of the states where there are competitive Senate races this year. In Georgia, Trump's net approval is negative 31. In North Carolina, it's negative 25. In Maine, Trump's net approval is negative 31. In Texas, it is negative 22. And in Michigan, Trump's net approval is negative 27. So, Jonathan Lemire, I'm curious. It almost feels like Trump and his administration is going in one direction, and the will of the American people, the needs of the American people, the needs of our alliances around the world, they're headed in a completely different direction. So it seems like he doesn't care about these numbers. Am I wrong?
Well, Mika, my expert analysis on that polling is it's real bad. None of this is working for the president right now. That's why we have Republicans, really worried about this November. Many privately concede the House all but gone. The Senate feels like a true toss-up when a year ago at this time, we would have said Republicans were heavily favored to keep at least the upper chamber, despite, of course, history telling us that the president, his party tends to do poorly in midterms. But you're right, Mika, in ticking through some of the issues here. The tariffs have been unpopular, and now we're at a renewed trade war with Canada. The Iran war, deeply unpopular, never sold by the president to the American people. All it has done is send prices soaring, particularly at the gas pump. And they've settled into a plan of economic pressure. Maybe that will work. And we are seeing some disagreement in Tehran as to how they want to approach the conflict. But even if this does work, it's probably going to be a long time, too late to save Republicans, perhaps, for this midterms. And we're seeing, of course, as we'll get into it a little bit later, even the president's efforts to try to lower beef prices. A lot of Republicans pushing back, saying, none of this is working right now. And John Heilemann, it seems like, to Mika's point, the president largely detached from a lot of this. To Heilemann, this is someone who has, seems to be focused solely on legacy, whether that's presiding over a number of America 250 events, including the Formula One race over the weekend, John Heilemann, and of course, we seem to have lost John Heilemann. We'll get him back in a moment. So we'll go to David French here instead. David French, if we have you, the president is focused on America 250 events. He's focused on things where he's trying to reshape physically Washington, D.C. And we saw the celebrations out of the White House because of the Supreme Court ruling at the end of last week that they could keep building the ballroom. And I even thought to myself, like, okay, that's the first, quote, good news headline that President Trump has received in a while. And yet even that good news headline for him is not good for the American people. We see polling that this just reinforces the idea that the public is like, well, wait, he's out of touch. He only cares about what he cares about, not what actually impacts our lives.
Yeah, the ballroom is not a political victory for Donald Trump. Every day the ballroom is in the news is a bad day for Trump. This is not something the American people really want at all. When you're running through that, the thing that just strikes me when you're running through all of the events that have occurred that are dragging down his approval rating, it strikes me how just intentionally self-inflicted all of this damage is. He comes into office, he inherits a border that was the American people were ready for him to close. He inherits an improving economy, and he inherits a declining inflation rate. He inherits declining crime rates. He was set for really smooth sailing for the next year, the next 2 years. And then he has provoked trade wars. He has initiated an actual war in the Middle East. You're beginning to get a sense that the world itself is spiraling out of control. You have expanding conflicts in Europe. The conflicts in Europe and Iran are starting to merge in some ways. And then this trade, every new headline, it's a new self-inflicted wound. This trade war with Canada, due to remarkable overreach in trade negotiations, it is sinking into the American people that this is self-inflicted. None of this is necessary. None of this is for them.
Yeah, and the thing is, look at the last 2 weeks of columns from Peggy Noonan. Last week, she talked about how he was bored. That boredom is not a good trait for a president to have, that trouble comes. Trouble finds you when you're president of the United States. Here, Donald Trump goes out looking for trouble because he's bored. This week's column, she talks about, well, another thing that is going to, again, dragging these numbers down. The level of corruption is unprecedented. You heard Democrats being attacked nonstop. It really is such a joke. It's such a joke what Trump Republicans have been saying over the past decade about Hunter Biden, what they've been saying about corruption, what they've been saying about Nancy Pelosi. Donald Trump executed more trades for more money in his first year back than Nancy Pelosi's husband, not Nancy Pelosi herself, Nancy Pelosi's husband, who's in the business, traded throughout her entire congressional career. And so that corruption, as Peggy Noonan says, corruption is another thing that is dragging down the approval ratings of a president who last week, she said, was bored.
So let's read from Peggy Noonan's latest column in the Wall Street Journal entitled The Art of the Self-Deal. She writes in part this: I'm thinking about the deeper effects of governmental corruption in the Trump era and why it leaves many not only indignant, but uneasy. I suspect it's doing something to us as a people. The thoughts were prompted by a poll this week from Reuters Ipsos, which Reuters headlined, "Most Americans believe Trump has inappropriately profited since returning to power." It reported that 69% of respondents see his personal business interests as influencing presidential decisions. 2/3 of independents, half of Republicans, and 9 in 10 Democrats shared that view.
I love this line. Republicans, God bless them. They were split on whether graft under Mr. Trump has gotten worse or better or stayed the same. Really? You're split on that?
Yeah, you're confused?
Are you that confused? Peggy goes on to say, which makes that polling question a case study in how bright people are capable of just not seeing what they don't want to see.
That is an important line there as well. An odd thing about all of this is the absence of furor. There is no broad public outcry. Why? Because corruption is a constant and the other side is dirty too, because the scandal threshold has skyrocketed. President Trump walked into history dragging a long tail of litigation, accusation, and lawsuits behind him. He never sold himself as a man of moral rectitude, and most supporters didn't think that's what they were buying. Jimmy Carter's shaking down the system to see what coins fall out would have been news. Donald Trump's doing the same is Tuesday. And there's the sheer scale. The extraordinary becomes ordinary through repetition. Scandals add up and become a blur, not a call to action. But the country pays a cost for all of this. Institutionally, everything happening today sets a precedent. Every abuse we accept widens when the range of possible misbehavior for the next administration.
That's what I've been saying for years to Republicans. What you accept today is going to be visited upon you from Democrats or an independent tech billionaire who becomes president of the United States. And they're going to point at your silence, your acquiescence to this corruption and to all the other chaos going on and saying, well, you were okay when Donald Trump did it.
Right.
So the precedent's been set, Jillian, but Peggy writes, if Jimmy Carter had done 1,000th of this, it would be a national scandal and Jimmy Carter would have been driven from office. For Donald Trump, well, voters expected him to be corrupt and he's not letting them down.
Well, there's a fantastic phrase to describe this, which is the normalization of deviance. And that came from a sociologist, Diane Vaughan, when she was studying the Challenger shuttle disaster. And she pointed out that actually, when you get really bad stuff happening by a government or an institution, it's not usually a case that people go from 0 to 60, from white to black overnight. What happens is the institution starts to see little slippages in standards over and over and over again, until slowly the boundary of what is normal begins to change. And that's, in a sense, what happened with the Challenger shuttle crisis, disaster, when basically engineers ignored little slippages in some of their safety standards. And it's what's happening in Washington today, because bit by bit, as Peggy writes, people are getting used to this. And what's striking is not just the fact they're getting used to it in terms of inside America. I'm American and British, but also on the world stage now, there's this kind of collective eye roll and shrug amongst other governments, and they're just starting to assume that Washington is a bit corrupt. And that's a real tragedy in every sense.